Welcome to Session 1, Introduction to Conversion Optimization. This is the first session of MMC 5436, Messaging Methodologies and the Practice of Conversion Optimization. Today we are going to begin by asking you how you would improve specific real-world marketing campaigns. From there, we'll explore 4 foundational principles to consider when using communication as influence. Next, we'll look at an example from a company who saw dramatic results by leveraging the conversion heuristic across a series of experiments. We'll conclude by looking at examples from past students who applied the heuristic to their own pages after completing the course. After watching this session, students will be able to understand the role communication plays in influencing conversion, examine the primary factors that impact the probability that a message achieves conversion. We will now join Dr. McLaughlin in the MECLABS Institute studio to explore the Introduction to Conversion Optimization.
Welcome to Session 1. We're going to get started right away by looking at an advertisement. You may or may not have seen this particular ad before, but I have a simple question for you. What would you do to improve the performance of this ad? Look at it for a moment. Consider the message. Consider the design. Ask yourself, how could you improve the response rate to this ad? Now think about it for a moment. Sort of remember your reason, and I'm going to show you a completely different example. Here is a critical landing page. This page has a remarkable history. You'll hear more about it coming forward, but just look at it for a moment and ask yourself a question. What would I do to improve the performance of this particular page? Now, once you've sort of formulated a reason, it's important to think even deeper and ask, so how am I developing this reason? What is the framework or the approach? So is it a matter of preference? You like what you're thinking about better than perhaps what's there now? You prefer a different image, for instance? Is it intuition? Or have you heard of some best practices? Perhaps you've seen other examples that come to mind, and you're thinking about how to draw from those examples to improve, or a different model or a different approach. Maybe it's experience. We say in MECLABS, there are no expert marketers, there are only experienced marketers and expert testers. And it's common on the internet to talk about best practice, but often best practices are just pooled ignorance. One person who doesn't know what they're doing copies another person who also doesn't know what they're doing. We have to be very careful because we sometimes equate the financial performance overall of an organization like Apple with the presentation of their advertisements or their online experience. And I'm not suggesting that we can't learn from Apple, and I just choose them because they've become so common in literature. The reality is, for many different reasons, we all develop various ways that we would think about or improve or try to improve the performance of a piece of collateral. But is there something consistent, a methodology, an approach that we could adopt that could make the quality of our recommendations consistently effective? We're going to think about that as this session unfolds and as we prepare for the course. And I know the course will be probably different than what you may expect. It does employ a methodology, but most importantly, it involves a whole shift in the paradigm of your thought process. And before we can even go there, we need to sort of look at some foundational principles that have an impact on how we talk about the subject. So let's begin with the first. The essence of life is communication. Essentially, if you were to look at that very sentence itself, life is, we have the subject and the predicate. And because life occurs across time and space, it is itself predication. It is the communication of your essence within the social dynamic or the world that you find yourself, your environment. And we're born into this social dynamic. And so for one organism to effectively survive or thrive in society, there is a requirement for some form of communication back and forth. This is natural. As a general rule, we all experience this. And one form of that communication is particularly vital to our existence. It's the ability to influence the choice of others. For 30 years, I've been asking a single question. Why do people choose one option over another? Why do they say yes to this option, which means no to everything else? And I want you to think about that in more depth as this whole class unfolds. But for now, let me show you two men and ask you, what do they have in common? Now, we could say they're both brilliant. They both impacted society. We could come up with a number of reasons, but I want to share with you one that I think is least likely to come up for many of us, and yet it involves a profound insight. Einstein obviously was a scientist, and the Reverend Martin Luther King was a social force, and it's difficult to give him a particular definition, but one thing both men have in common is both engaged in a form of marketing. Marketing in the sense that both wanted to foster conclusions, both wanted people to think differently, and both engaged systematically in a method for influencing the thinking, influencing the choices of others. What's important about that is for you and I to realize that while we're going to study marketing in this course, in the context of commercial application, and perhaps for many of you, it impacts your day-to-day job right now as a professional marketer or in some form or connection to marketing. But the truth is, all of us are deeply engaged in the fundamental activity of marketing in many areas of our life outside of the basic commercial application that's so closely associated with the word. Decisions are preceded by conclusions. That's almost self-evident. But what comes next is very important. Thus, you might think, or the insight that draws from that is that declarations don't necessarily move people, rather conclusions do. Now, this leads to an insight about marketing that's rather different than perhaps what we often think about or even hear in our courses in school. The effective marketer fosters conclusions. Sometimes we think of marketing as an activity of making claims, but in effect, I think the most powerful marketing helps you develop a conclusion. It provides data in such a way, in such an arrangement, that you draw from that data essential conclusions, and those conclusions, of course, influence your choice. And your choice not only is, but is also the stimulus for your behavior. Now, most of us, depending on how old we are, may recall the introduction of the iPod. We can all look back now and realize it completely changed the world. It changed really how the entire music industry and many other things. What's interesting to me is the little piece of data, 1,000 songs. The way this particular ad leveraged that data, 1,000 songs in your pocket, that's more of a general claim. It's very different than the kind of marketing that we're used to seeing. It's an accurate point. You can have essentially 1,000 songs in your pocket. At the time that claim was made, it represented a breakthrough in value proposition, a breakthrough in the value proposition of a player in the music space. It also led to many people drawing to the conclusion that they wanted to at least investigate or find out more about the iPod. And eventually it led to a transformation. You can look at the sales charts. We won't spend a lot of time here. You'll notice the extended blue spikes, those lines at the top, occur during the releases. But the enormous amount of revenue generated by this innovation in society was just the beginning of a transformation that made Apple the largest organization in the world. Critical to that was fostering certain conclusions, and Apple did that brilliantly. And we'll talk more about that as some of the classes unfold. But what's important for us to realize right now is that every person, every one of you that's engaged now, that's listening to this, is also engaged in a variety of marketing activities, perhaps in their job, but certainly outside of their job. In fact, you marketed yourself in order to get your job. In fact, you may have had to market yourself to a particular school where you got the qualifications that you needed to even begin your career or to work in your job. We're engaging in marketing in our relationships We engage in marketing all day long in various forms. And it's critical for us to know that that basic activity of influencing decisions is not only profoundly interesting, but the more we study it, the more we can learn about what we do naturally and how to improve the overall effectiveness. And in this particular case, how to apply it to a situation like you see on the screen now. As we return to the piece of collateral that we looked at originally, I can ask the same question. What would you do to influence the decision process associated with this page to get more people to say yes to the call to action? Now, we spent 20 years trying to understand that question. Frankly, it's been almost 30. The MechLabs Institute is sort of the organization that grew out of a project that was born at the advent of the internet. In the earliest years, I was doing some other research when I discovered this notion that some computers were networked or connected. That was revolutionary in such times. We didn't have HTML, so there was no World Wide Web. There were no web pages, but there were computers talking to each other, and this was, for me, a life-changing moment. I remember postulating what would happen if there were more nodes and greater bandwidth between the nodes. Perhaps there would be transactions that occur online, even banking or media. I even talked to other leaders about this and found that I couldn't get anyone excited, and I had to make a decision. This course exists, and it's sort of important for you to understand that because you'll know where all this data and the case studies and the experiments are coming from. This course exists because I had to make a decision. That decision involved taking a long walk on the beach with my wife in Florida, sharing with her what I discovered about the internet, and asking her, do we fund research in this area? At that point, I couldn't find a single partner. And what I said to her is the reason that we're actually here today. I said, if the internet becomes all that I see or envision in terms of its possibilities, it will not just be a channel, it will be the greatest behavioral research lab in the history of mankind. And these questions that I've had about how people make decisions and why they choose one option over another will become immediately apparent in a whole different way than has thus far presented itself in the academic debate, because we won't have to submit propositions and argue in some library, but rather we'll be able to peer into the process as millions of people are making decisions in real time. And that insight was what powered our decision to say yes to the founding of the institution that eventually has become MechLabs. And for all of these years, we've been studying, trying to understand. We have looked at more than 20,000 plus path experiments, running tests to try and unpack the essence of the process that occurs as people try to assimilate value and do the cognitive calculation that leads to a yes. We'll talk more about that as the course unfolds. Right now, we're going to be drawing from all of those tests and all of those experiments and all of those interviews and many languages and cultures around the world and pulling case studies out that will help us learn together. Now listen, I know that this class is just starting, and I realize that even as I begin it, I may sort of find it difficult to explain to you even the profound impact that this content has had on my life personally and the lives of many of us that research here. But I do want to say this. The goal that I have as a teacher, as you begin this with me, is more than simply to help you pass an examination or to earn an important credential. Those two things are critical, but to me they're not the fundamental motivator for all that we're doing here. I'd like to share with you what I've been learning. I'd like to share it with you in a way that will help provide new insights to your thinking as an individual and as a marketer. And if you will apply yourself and try to do these assignments with depth and if you reflect and think, we'll do everything we possibly can in this course to help you pass, but more than that, to help you gain particular insights that will be especially powerful as you not only carry out your career, but as you make important decisions in your own life. We are the product of the choices we make and the choices that are made about us. And so let's start to investigate this together, and let's learn something together, and let's do more than check the box and say, hey, I passed that course. Let's learn together. We're still learning. And as I speak, there are tests and experiments going on inside of MEC Labs that are still informing our thinking and still refining our conclusions. But I'd like to take you back to a test series that goes before all of these, and it's built around a simple heuristic. To get there, you need to see this heuristic because the first moment that it appears on the screen, it might be a bit intimidating. It's not a complicated math equation. You're not going to do this in some sort of algebra that requires you to substitute the variables, etc. This simple heuristic is not much different in some ways than this set of glasses. It's a lens, and when you learn to put it on, it's going to help you overcome your natural blind spot. All of us have a blind spot that impacts our ability to write effective marketing communications. That blind spot is derived from our self-interest. It's hard to see the world through the other's eyes. And philosophers from Sartre to Camus, and then going back across the millennium, not just in the continent but elsewhere, have tried to understand how humans are motivated and why we interact in such ways and what is the good life. All of that still connects to this simple piece. The reality is, no matter what the philosophers say, inside of all of us is this powerful force of self-interest that, if we're not careful, blinds us all day long to the way that we communicate that may not be as effective as it could, or to the natural tendency to protect ourselves. We need a way to overcome that. And these glasses form a lens that help me to see in a different way. And so does this heuristic. As we start to unpack it, you'll realize that the numbers on the left side are coefficients, and they simply suggest the relative impact of the variables relative to each other. And you'll notice the M is motivation, and V is the clarity of the value proposition, and incentive and friction and anxiety. The list is on the screen. These become basic elements that can impact how people perceive the value we're trying to communicate. Learning how to apply this heuristic can be transformative in its overall impact, and I have seen it generate billions upon billions of dollars in new revenue. So we're going to learn, and one way to learn it is to look at its application in a particular case study. And our friends at the New York Times provide us with an excellent example, and the study is old enough that we're not giving up any information that would be, a disservice to our good partners there. And I'd rather just take a few minutes and unpack this study by pointing you back to the page we looked at the beginning of the class. By the way, we're almost done. The bulk of what I want to say in this early session can be understood as we look at the iterations of this particular page and all that was learned from it. So consider this to be the control, and what you'll notice is that there are some difficulties with the page. Go back and ask yourself, what would you do to improve its performance? I was asked that question in an important meeting. And to answer the question, I scratched on a whiteboard these words: C equals 4M plus 3V plus 2I minus F minus 2A. You're going to learn that forwards and backwards before we're done. We'll talk more about why in just a little bit. But in doing so, I began to draw lines on the board and to illustrate where this particular page was underperforming. Now, I won't use the slide per se. I can tell you from memory that I mentioned that the column on the right looks like it's ancillary information or supporting information or perhaps a separate offer, and yet it's essential to the decision. So it's in the wrong location in the iPath. Therefore, it's wrong on the page. The headline is truncated on the page improperly, has the wrong words, and it's above a paragraph that is also truncated improperly and also has the wrong words and no iPath. The image is a lovely image, but it's in the wrong location, and it could be better. Most importantly, the call to action has 3 evenly weighted options, and those 3 evenly weighted options are interfering with each other, mitigating conversion overall. Now, when I mentioned that, it wasn't so much an opinion or an experience based on something I'd seen an example somewhere, but drawing upon this heuristic that you see on the right hand, I could easily zero in on the friction and the anxiety and the problems with value proposition and its clarity. And even deeper in a conversation that didn't occur there but occurred shortly afterwards, go back into the metrics and understand the motivation, that's what the M is for, and its impact on conversion. Now, you can learn to do the same thing, but it's not enough for us as teachers to say to you, this is the method, use it, it produces a better result. You need to see the science. You need to experience for yourself what we discovered through honest experimentation. And so I remember, you'll see the page on the left, making the suggestions that I just said, and I was asked a simple question: is there any way you could get a conversion lift without changing the page very much? Now, there were special reasons why I was asked that question, but the important thing is we said yes, and we changed one critical section, the call to action. Now, there's a pre-check radio button in that call to action, and I don't like the wording. At that point, we couldn't change the wording because of business rules, but we were able to change this obstacle that occurs at the bottom of the page in the control, where you're looking at 3 evenly weighted options. Now, these high-paid, very talented marketers were doing their best to get people to say yes, but look at the 3 words on the button: buy now, learn more, or free sample. Why would you even buy right now if you can get something free to look at? And what does learn more mean? The marketers who built this page were thinking through their own perspective. They had spent a lot of money to build the sort of the tour that's associated with the learn more and the tech device associated with the free sample. And the reality is they knew most people would need to click on one of those first before they made the decision. But there was the buy now button because someone said, well, what if they want to purchase right away? In the end, all the forward momentum that one develops as they move through the conversation in their mind associated with that page stops when we present people with options like this, and they have to pause and try to understand, which option should I take? Momentum is slowed, and so is conversion. So we suggested a simple fix: make it an easier decision. And it's easy to suggest that. It's another thing to test it. Here's what the results indicated. The new page produced a 64% increase in conversion. Now think about that for a moment. That's dramatic, especially when the product is a digital product. That's a lot of margin. That's a lot of profit. But it was really just the beginning. I remember them saying, well, they were very excited. And the results were important to them at that time because this was a new launch and it had challenges. I said, well, I think we could run another experiment, but we need more control over the wording. Remember, we couldn't change those words in that left control. It's now the new control. We couldn't change those words in that radio box. Let us change the wording, and we think we could have a different impact. I want you to see there's the control. We now use this wording at the bottom to increase the value and address anxiety. And so look at the treatment that appears. The first thing I'd ask you to notice is that it's not much different. So if there is a performance result, one might expect that performance result to be somewhat better or somewhat worse, but not dramatically so, because there's not a huge difference in the 2 visuals. But think again, because there is a high impact to the sequence of thought. And the key here is not to think of optimizing web pages, but rather to optimizing the sequence of thought. I didn't believe in optimizing web pages or television commercials or print ads, but rather optimizing that interaction, the mental conversation, the sequence of thought associated with those. So if you look at the control and you look at the treatment, they're not all that different, but look at the difference in performance. 541%. Now this is something to be excited about. It's not just the tremendous boost in revenue. It's a deep learning about the customer. So customers respond better when we do X and Y. And that principle that you're learning there in that specific situation is also transferable, and it was transferred and used to improve performance in home delivery. And in fact, the Times has spent the last 12 years applying principles like this to drive significant results, even to the new sort of all digital offer that came out some time ago. They've passed over 1 million subscribers doing that. Let's back up for a second. There's the control, there's the treatment. The 2 pages look similar, but the difference in the rate of yes. Think of it that way. And I prefer that you think of conversion as the rate of yes. We are in the business of winning yeses. It's different, you know. You can't force people to say yes in a situation where they have free will. So all that you can do is either fool them, which I think is a terrible mistake, or you can help them. And if you understand the value proposition, which we're going to talk about in subsequent courses, and its essential role, you'll understand how to communicate in such a way that you allow them to draw accurate conclusions, and the right conclusions will lead to more yeses. So marketer, don't think of your job as making promises and lots of claims. I don't even believe in a brand promise. We can talk about that. And what I just said may be sacrosanct for many of you. I believe in a brand expectation, very different. My promise has no power until it becomes an expectation on your part. But when inside of you, you expect a certain experience from me, I now have associated with that brand a powerful form of equity. Indeed, if you've heard me say this in other training perhaps, if Apple at this point produced an iChicken, we'd all stand in line to buy it. Why? Because we don't think we need an iChicken, but every time Apple does something like that, think tablet, we discover afterwards, wow, this was cool. I'm glad I got this. My life is better. I like this. Apple has this very special place they occupy in our mind. And that's where their true equity is. But this experiment wasn't done. I remember after this, the leader from the Times saying to me, look, this was amazing. If you want to do another experiment, we'll let you change the page any way you'd like. Now that might sound exciting for those of you that are sort of thinking about this in the context of professional services, but it wasn't to me because we'd already created very high expectations. So I tried to lower those expectations and say, well, look, we've made big changes to the thought sequence. Don't expect more than, say, a 20% difference. But we built a page that capitalized on a number of the other key heuristic elements. And what you're looking at in this particular treatment is pure science. Now remember, we're already gaining a significant increase because the 541% is compounding. And it's compounding on the original lift that you saw, the 64%. So any change here, even a few percentage points, will have a further impact on that series. It's financial math. But what we did here was apply the things that we're talking about in a very deliberate way and saw yet again, despite the fact that we tried to lower expectations to about 20%, a further increase of 47. This led to a conversation that said, you know, if you could just change a word on this page, I think you might see 10%. Look at these 2 pages. They are virtually identical. And if I asked you to find the word, it'd be hard to do so. So let me blow it up. There's a section of each page. And if you look at that, it's still hard to find the word. But you'll notice that we want to strike the brain, so to speak, the mind, with the word risk in a different order than it currently appears. We put it right in front of the word free. There's a very specific reason we had to do that. And by the way, that was particular to that time in the internet and that moment in the evolving newspaper industry within the digital context. And so it became very important. And again, you know, there are no expert marketers, just experienced marketers and expert testers. Experience because experience provides you with pattern recognition, and pattern recognition is the foundation of wisdom. That little change produced a further 12%, which is a lot of revenue, by the way, in conversion. Now, at this point, if you're tracking with me and you're thinking, wow, something's going on here that intrigues me, it's about to get more interesting because at this point, we challenge everything we're doing. We actually almost want to throw out all the previous success, and you say, how could you possibly do that? That's the whole point of good science. We don't want to stop, and adequacy is the enemy of excellence. Peter Drucker said that. Gaining a lift of X% and feeling good about it might be satisfying, but actually could be very deceptive. Because let's take a different example. Let's suppose in another process, we see a 20% improvement and everyone's excited. We all walk away congratulating ourselves. But in fact, had we made the proper change, we could have seen a 45% improvement. And that difference is now being wasted every single moment that process is up. Listen, as you're sitting here listening to me try and sort of introduce this program and this course to you today, billions of dollars are leaking in funnels all over the globe. Billions upon billions upon billions of dollars. I've seen a single experiment produce $117 million just during the test series. I saw one experiment that we did for a large organization produce over $200 million. And that was just one change to one aspect of the funnel. You know, learning this isn't just about an opportunity you can seize, but it's about preventing the losses that are piling up right now as we sit here. Some of you are employed in other organizations. You're not fresh out of grad school. You may be working in a marketing environment. There's so much money right now flying out the window in our companies that if we truly knew it, our boards would go into a revolt. So would our shareholders. The truth is that series of wins in the New York Times was necessary, but not sufficient. I'm using a philosophical distinction. It was good, but there was more to do. And so to test ourselves, we produced a radical redesign that engaged long copy. Now, long copy was a terrible challenge to the way they were doing this at that moment, and they didn't want to run this test. I'm not saying this isn't because they're effective. They're very effective. And they have their own optimization group today, and they can do all of these things internally, and I'm very impressed. These were, this was more than 10 years ago. And they were still learning. And I use this example to make the point, and because it's old enough that I can use it without, doing anything that would be unfair to our partner. These research partners make all of this possible. But I want to share something with you as I move to this next page. The result you're seeing is no different than the test that I reviewed in the last 14 days. I reviewed test after test after test taking place all over the world where we're seeing dramatic increases in lifts, just as dramatic as this. So I mention that to say to you, just because these years have passed doesn't mean it's now much more difficult to get the lifts. The reality is we're still doing a very poor job in our communications. So look for this page. Look at this long copy page, because had we not run this, we would have missed a further 88% increase in conversion. That's a lot of money. Indeed, the slide I'm going to show you next compounds. And I want to warn everybody here, particularly scholars, that this is an oversimplification. We ran more tests than the tests that you see here. These are highlights for the purposes of making this simple point. There is a cumulative increase in conversion that had a dramatic impact on the success of the product and its launch. But there's really only one point I'm trying to make, and that is that you don't achieve these kinds of results without learning to overcome your blind spot, without learning to overcome the way self-interest can so cloud our judgment. You've got to get out of your skin. You've got to get into the skin of the prospect. You've got to see the world through their eyes. So indeed, part of this course isn't simply to help you to see better, but to give you a new set of eyes to see with, the eyes of the customer. And to do that consistently, day in and day out, when you're tired and when you've had deadlines that are crushing and when you don't feel at the top of your game and you still need to produce, there has to be a method, something repeatable that you can apply over and over again to get those results. And that method is being used by students. The example I want to share with you just in a flash, this occurred in a class we were teaching. This is one of the students' pages. It's not even a good page yet. Remember, it's just one iteration in a cycle of tests. But the new page that you see on the right produced a 69% increase. And guys, that's conversion. Look at this from the University of New England. It is a 300% increase. Look at the two pages. Boom. What happened here? Well, dramatic as it might see in terms of the numbers itself, the changes were pretty simple. Someone applied C equals 4M plus 3V plus 2I minus F minus 2A. And yes, I'm saying that in rote because by the time this course is over, you'll know it just that well. That's one thing you'll learn, and you'll learn to say it, and you'll learn to think through that lens. It'll be essential to really capturing and mastering this material. But as you learn it, you're going to develop a rigorous, repeatable method for seeing the world through the eyes of the customer. And the power that has, not just to get a lift, but to leverage important learnings about the customer that can be used all over the business. It's hard to underestimate the true power that can have on the work that you're doing right now, or the decisions that will be important in your life as your career unfolds.
This concludes Session 1, Introduction to Conversion Optimization of the course MMC 5436, Messaging Methodologies and the Practice of Conversion Optimization. We began this session by discussing communication in a more philosophical sense, by understanding that the essence of life is communication. We then explored one form of communication vital to our existence, influencing others' decisions and actions. From there, we applied this more directly to marketing by determining that decisions are preceded by conclusions, and that effective marketing fosters conclusions. Additionally, Dr. McLaughlin explained the importance becoming effective at influencing decisions has across the many dimensions of life.